Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for an hour this afternoon as we share some exciting news about our managed firewall service. So real quick overview of the agenda. We'll do some introductions to let you know who it is that is going to give you the overview of the service today. We will get into the specifics of what is MCNC's managed firewall service. And then we'll go through what to expect, right? Service level targets, onboarding schedule, that sort of thing. And then again, at the end, we'll open it up for that Q&A. So let's get started. Introductions. I'm Ruthy Mabe. I manage the security services business here at MCNC. My team owns this service with the leadership and support of everybody that you see on the call here, and as you can imagine, many others here at MCNC. So quick shout out to everyone at MCNC who has helped us get to the point that we're launching this service. We're very excited to share this with you today. So one thing to note there is that I'll be one of your primary points of contact during this project and an escalation point for you when the service is in production. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the session here. So with that, Chris, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Beal. I head up the security team here at MCNC, and I'm just really excited about this service offering. As Ruthy said, there's been a lot of work pulling it together, and I think it's going to be a great thing for the community, and I'm really excited to get going and get it off the ground.
Good afternoon, Dave Furiness. I'm approaching my 15-year reunion at MCNC and looking forward to working with everybody on this. My team will be managing the deployments, migrating our community from the current ASA platform to the Palo Alto platform that we'll talk about in a little bit, and or help you migrate from a platform that you may be supporting yourself currently to the Palo Alto platform. So again, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and work with you going forward.
Hey, I'm David Brain. I'm responsible for the operations group at MCNC. We're providing the support for the firewall service, so we'll be the folks you'll be calling for assistance with firewall issues and changes.
Good afternoon. I'm Gonz Guzman. I'm a lead on Dave Furiness' team. Myself and a handful of other engineers will be working with the PSUs to grab their configs and massage them into a configuration that will be placed on the Palo day one, and then hopefully at that, once we've got that config migrated over and it's clean, and we can work on any other enhancements that folks would want to have on the firewall moving forward. But just kind of set the stage, right? I mean, there are a lot of you and few of us, so we definitely appreciate your support in this service because it's going to be a large effort, and you are going to benefit from that effort. So thank you for joining this webinar today, and I'll hand it back over to Ruthy.
Thanks, Gon. With that, I'm actually going to hand it right on over to Chris to get us started here.
Thanks, Ruthy. So we wanted to start off talking today first about MCNC's approach to managed security services, generally speaking, and then also specifically how it pertains to this new firewall service. So any of the services that we are deploying and rolling out across the community, we are focused on trying to maximize value in terms of improving security posture, both for individual PSUs and also collectively for the community as a whole. So that's really our primary driver in doing this. So we're not interested in doing a firewall service for the sake of having a firewall. It's really for us all about how can we use that firewall to drive meaningful security improvements. So there's a couple of components of that. First and foremost is the firewall itself is a gateway device that controls traffic going in and out of your network. So we have to make sure that that device is secure and that the service we're delivering is secure. So there's some things we have to do in order for us to guarantee that level of security is appropriate, and that we're not going to create any exposure for your environment through the service that we're offering. But secondly, it's how do we leverage that platform in order to make meaningful security improvements. So for us, first and foremost, it starts with having a world-class technology platform to build off of. So you heard Dave mention earlier, and Gonz reference to Palo Alto. So for us, that platform, that's the foundation that we're building off of here is the Firewall platform from Palo Alto Networks. And we chose that platform because we believe that it can allow us to deliver world-class performance and efficiency and security capabilities. So that's kind of the starting point for this that we'll be building off of. But we also need to make sure that as we deploy this new platform that we are starting from a strong foundation. So that means not just taking your existing firewall config and migrating it over. As Gonz alluded to, part of what we're doing with this service will be an evaluation of that config before it gets deployed on the new platform to make sure that we're starting off strong, that there aren't security weaknesses that we would introduce from day one. So Dave, you're going to hear him talk more about that process and how we will go about doing that to try to make sure that as this new firewall is being deployed, that we're starting from a strong place from a security standpoint. So we want to make sure we're doing that as we're going through. But I think we all know that just because we might start with a strong security configuration, that doesn't mean that things don't change over time. You all will request configuration changes. New services will need to be enabled. New rules will need to be added to the firewall. So just because we're starting strong doesn't mean that we won't change over time. So part of what our service will deliver for you is risk reviews on those changes as they're requested to make sure that we're not going to implement something that's going to cause a security problem. So you're going to hear about that and that process, and that's a really important way that we can help ensure the integrity of the service going forward from a security standpoint. We're also going to be providing periodic reviews of the configs, so not just of changes, but whatever's deployed. Someone's going to be paying attention to that on a routine basis, and if we discover a vulnerability or something that's questionable or concerning, we'll be able to address that. So that'll be part of the service as well. And also really important to security is this idea of continuous monitoring. So it's not just a tool or a capability that's been deployed and it runs, but that someone's paying attention to what's happening on the firewall on an ongoing basis. We've had a number of instances in our community that MCNC serves in the past where a security incident has happened and the firewall has seen something that would have been helpful to know in order to help address that issue before it turned into something big, but folks weren't paying attention to what was happening on the firewall. So part of our service is providing folks that will pay attention to what is happening on the firewall on an ongoing basis so that any questionable things from a security standpoint can be detected quickly and that a response can happen. So that's an important part of the service that we will be providing here going forward. So again, all of this that we're talking about doing is really done, as I said earlier, to improve the security posture of your PSU individually and also the K-12 community as a whole here in North Carolina. We want to start with a strong foundation, and we want to provide important components of this managed service that will help improve our security posture and maintain a strong security posture going forward. One last thing I want to say is that we know that doing these things for a PSU, all this kind of continuous monitoring and management, can be resource intensive. And so that's a key objective of our service, is to help take that burden off of your plate. We, MCNC, are going to provide those resources to do that, to free your resources up to go work on the 1,000 other things that you all need to take care of on a daily basis. So that's going to be a key objective of what we're trying to do with the firewall service, as well as make your jobs easier and your lives easier. Again, I said it earlier, I'm really excited about this service. I think it's going to be great. And with that, I will hand it off to Dave to talk about the details of all that stuff I just alluded to.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So yeah, I just wanted to provide a little more depth to some of the key points that Chris already hit on. We mentioned moving away from the ASA platform to a Palo Alto Networks platform. I think many of you know that the ASA basically uses ports and source and destination IP addresses for application categorization and control. I think a lot of you know that there's some challenges with doing that effectively. For example, trying to block peer-to-peer type traffic. Palo uses multiple mechanisms as part of their App ID technology, which allows you to actually do a better job categorize an application at layer 7 and be able to create policy based on that application characterization, not based on a characterization that's a port or an IP address. I've included a link in the presentation here to some additional information on how App ID works within Palo. So if you're so inclined, I encourage you to take a look at that. If you have detailed questions and want to know more, we can probably take those offline as well. In addition to the base license for the Palo Alto network, we're including the advanced threat protection license as part of the service offering. Again, a link's provided to some additional information on what is and what's included in the advanced threat protection license. There's a number of other things that Chris had mentioned that were part of kind of the advanced security service. And I think a lot of this comes out of what we have learned as a community over the last, 10 years of providing a managed security service. A lot of that has to do with what happens after day one, right? What happens after you become a firewall customer? How do we maintain the security and the integrity of your firewall configuration? And I'll talk in good detail about the migration process, but basically there are a post-deployment hardening of the firewall. So we apply a base configuration, and then we watch what's going on in the firewall, and then we harden it based on what we see over a period of time after that initial migration. And then there'll be subsequent annual reviews of your security configuration so that we can make sure that things haven't gone astray over the course of the year in terms of the posture and security of your configuration. And then lastly, a key piece of the advanced security service is having MCNC watching security events, monitoring those events, and then alerting you to critical and high priority events, much like we do currently with the managed endpoint protection service. These next couple bullets, I think it's important to, again, talk about lessons learned over the last couple of years. And, what we're really trying to do here is balance security with responsiveness, right? So we have to make sure that we maintain a secure posture, but we also want to be responsive to what you as a community need on a day-to-day basis. So I've got a change that I need made. How do I make that change? How quickly can I have that change made? Those kind of things. So we have a change management process essentially in place where, and David will talk a little bit more to this later, but essentially in the past, any change that was submitted was carte blanche implemented. So if somebody said, I'm going to open up a remote desktop to any, and there was no vetting of that type of request. So there'll be engineers that will be looking at those requests. And if potential concerns are identified, then we will work with you to make sure that we understand the business case for that particular change request, and that you understand the risk associated with that particular request. So implementing a little more formal change management process. I talked about balancing security with responsiveness, and we felt that doing this kind of change management in order to support that effectively, we're going to have you know, very well defined change management process around when we do these changes. And I think this next one is a very positive thing, and it's a commitment, you know, for MCNC to do this on a reasonable effort basis. But basically, any changes that are submitted prior to 12 p.m. on a business day, any standard changes that are submitted before 12 p.m. on a business day, will be included in that day's change window. So currently, the change window that we're looking at is 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. So if you get a change in by noon of that day, we'll have that change implemented sometime between that window. And again, we'll go into that in a little more detail here in a minute when David talks about the service level agreement itself. And then lastly, centralized logging. We will be logging mostly security related events. That information will be available to you by giving you access to Palo's network management platform, which is the Panorama platform. And we can also, we'll work with you, we can also enable additional logging on a temporary basis for diagnostic purposes. So if you're seeing an issue or we're seeing an issue, we'll work with you to change the logging levels and make that data available to you as well. So, next one, Ruthy. From a, you know, kind of what's stayed the same basically, or, you know, other service specifics, I should say. Contracted bandwidth, internet bandwidth will still determine what model firewall is used. So the table here kind of outlines, you know, where we're at currently. Like in your current service, if you bandwidth tier, for example, would increase from 10 gig to 15 gig, then as part of that bandwidth upgrade, we would be doing a firewall upgrade. So again, that really hasn't changed. Chris mentioned this earlier, from an advanced threat service, advanced threat protection, the same folks at MCNC that are looking at the data being generated by CrowdStrike, by the Managed Endpoint Protection Service, will be the same folks that will be looking at and responding to security events that we see on the firewall. And then also, I think it's important to note that the self-managed service offering is currently not available, but it's under consideration. We're working with DPI now to determine what that's going to look like. But right now we're looking at a fully managed service. And we've mentioned this a couple times already. You know, 24/7 by 365 monitoring administration support will be provided. You'll contact MCNC for support on the firewall, just like you do today, and that will be available through you know, email, phone, similar methods of communication. So I think that's what I got, Ruthy.
Thanks, Dave. So next we'll turn it over to David to hear more about those service level targets.
Hey, yeah, and as Dave said, from a high level, things stay the same. If you need help with the firewall, contact MCNC and we help you. This lays out the targets for our service response. And I'm not going to read through the whole slide here, but obviously critical incidents where the firewall's failed, you don't have connectivity, we respond, you know, within 4 hours. It would be similar in the situation to if your NCREN CPE failed, that would be handled the same way. You know, and it goes down through to, you know, lower level incidents and security alerts. The interesting thing here is that there are some security alert type incidents which would be related to things we see on your network that we would contact you about. So if we saw something that was extremely serious, we would contact you within 4 hours. So that's the targets here. As Dave said, we've got a little bit more change management procedure that we've laid out to try and combine, both the stability and the flexibility that we want to have of the service. So if you go on to the next slide, that has the change management pieces. So these for change requests. We've kind of come up with these 4 categories of change requests. So there's the standard change, which is a simple, straightforward change that we have judged that is unlikely to have any impact on service. So that's the one that was spoken about earlier that we will attempt to get in within the same day change window if it's in by midday. A normal change would be a more significant change. So you're looking at maybe, say, adding an interface to the firewall or making a change that may have some impact. These would be run through a change management process internally with us. There'd be extra vetting. We looked at by some engineers on our side, and so those have a longer window. And that's a good thing in that gives us time to determine this is a safe change to make, and we'll get those out. And then the other 2 are the urgent change, the emergency change. Emergency change is if it's related to an incident and we have we need to make a change to fix something. An urgent change would be if you're requesting to have a change made outside of the normal change management window or outside of the normal time frame. So it happens, right? And that's where there is some flexibility here. We are able to, if something we understand that something things will come up that you need a change made quickly to get something working, and we can work with you with that. And that's where the urgent changes come in. And that would, that would be a request from you to escalate to an urgent change, and we could then accommodate that change within expedited time frame. So.
All right. Is that good, David?
That's good.
All right. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So moving on in the what to expect section, right? Now the question is, how do you get on the schedule? How do you enroll? How are you involved in this migration? So as previously mentioned, we are prioritizing the migration of firewall users of the current NCDIT firewall service. So that's going to be happening in the next few months. We will be reaching out on that schedule. One thing that will be required there is a statement of work. So this should be a familiar process for you if you are taking advantage of the managed endpoint service or some of MCNC other security services. It's a no-cost statement of work that includes, the SLA information that David just provided an overview of, contact information, service scope, things like that. So we will begin pushing those SOWs out early next week to all of the existing DIT firewall customers. And as you can imagine, as we're doing this migration work that's going to be talked about schedule-wise on the upcoming slides, we want to make sure that the paperwork piece is not what's holding up that schedule. So we will be proactively reaching out to you, trying to address what questions you might have about that statement of work. So that's coming early next week. We will be including the link to the webinar. If we have the FAQs, we'll include those as well, so that as you and your colleagues are reviewing that statement of work, if anybody would like to go back and review the webinar, that will be made available. So if you are a PSU that is interested in taking advantage of this service and you're not currently utilizing the DIT firewall service, the way that you get enrolled is you email securityservices@mcnc.org. So we are, again, prioritizing the migration piece, but if you share the information of, hey, my existing firewall service is coming up for renewal in a couple of months, can I get on the schedule early? We will try and accommodate on a case-by-case basis. So you just need to provide that information to us. So the too long, don't read version of this is statement of work is coming your way. Please make sure to review and return as soon as possible. All right, so from there, let's talk about the schedule itself, or the onboarding process, excuse me. Dave?
Sure. So again, the client network engineering team, the consulting team at MCNC will be owning and managing the onboarding process. Fortunately, I've got Gonz at my disposal, and Gonz will be my team lead on that, along with several others in the client network engineering team. Again, this is something that we've been doing, through the onboarding of the ASAs over the last 10 years. So we've got a pretty good handle on what's going on in the firewall space. And, it was Gonz and others that were doing the firewall audits as part of the cyber hygiene assessments that we did a couple of years ago. So I think we're pretty well positioned and have a pretty good handle on, what we need to be doing in the firewall space for the K-12 community. Ruthy mentioned the start. Essentially, time zero is when we receive the no-cost statement of work from the PSU. Gonz and others are actually, and this part is pretty much started, but going through existing configurations for the ASA platforms. We use a tool called Expedition, which is a tool available through Palo. We convert your configuration from the ESA to the Palo platform. That becomes a base level config for the Palo. We provision the Palo for management and log retention and panorama. We then take that firewall config, we run it through a scrubbing process. So we essentially, that's a peer review. So my team will do the initial configuration. We'll have somebody in the security team do a peer review. As part of step one and step two, we're identifying potential weaknesses and risks in the current configuration. So then subsequent to step one and two, there's a risk review and I should say just general policy review with the PSU to make whatever configuration changes or optimizations can be made relative to those policies, as an outcome of that risk review. Once that's done, we'll be coordinating with you an appropriate date and time to do the migration. So that's the physical replacement of your existing platform to the Palo Alto platform. Obviously, that will be done at your times defined by you guys. We're planning to do all of these after hours, and would expect that we could find a time working with you after hours to do that. We mentioned the policy optimization. We can only do so much converting a firewall based on port and IP address to application aware. So what we do essentially is we do that migration based on what we know from your existing configuration. And then we watch traffic for 30 days or 45 days. And based on the traffic that we see across that firewall, we do what's called a policy optimization. So we'll further tighten down, further harden that policy on the firewall based on the data that we see, based on the information traversing your firewall over that period of time. And then again, as we mentioned earlier, that's a process that we'll be doing on an annual basis, just to make sure that we maintain the security of the firewall over time, and it's just not a point in time effort. So, all right, Ruthy. So let me just, from a high-level schedule standpoint, we have about 220 firewalls to migrate. That's existing ASA. That does not include anybody that may be interested that's moving from a firewall they own to the service. So we're trying, our goal is to do about 40 to 50 firewalls a month, which is no small task. Thank you, Gonz. We are a little dependent on supply chain issues. I'm sure everybody on this call is tired of hearing about supply chain issues. We've been pretty fortunate working with Palo so far in terms of them committing to a date and them meeting that date. but there is still some uncertainty around some products that we're waiting for. But at the end of the day, we're looking for converting all of our 2 gig or less customers, and that has to do with the platforms and the availability of that platform, starting in early October and finishing up in the end of February, and then working on our greater than 2 gig customers, starting sometime in the middle of November and finishing up in the March timeframe. There are a handful of firewall customers whose upgrades are pending a firewall replacement. We've got a couple folks moving from 2 gig to 3 gig, which takes us to a different platform. We're trying to get those expedited, so we're not waiting on upgrades, or we're not waiting to complete the upgrades on firewalls. That's a work in progress, but I'm optimistic that we'll be able to move a couple of you in the higher end migrations before the mid-November, based on our ability to expedite the couple that are waiting for upgrades. Each PSU upgrade engagement will probably last about 2 to 4 weeks. And Gonz mentioned this early on. In order for us to hit that 40 to 50 a month, in order for this to be an effective and successful outcome, once we get you guys on the schedule and once we begin the engagement, having your collaboration and support through that process is going to be really important. That 2 to 4 weeks does not include the 30 to 60 day policy optimization that I talked about. That really starts after we get that firewall installed. And I mentioned this earlier that all cutovers will be performed after hours, at dates and times that are approved by the PSU. So that should give you kind of a high level on how we're moving forward here. Thanks, Ruthy.
Thanks, Dave. So that brings us to the end of our regularly scheduled programming, and now we are going to open it up for Q&A. So in the Zoom window, you should be able to click on the little Q&A icon. Please feel free to type those questions that you have in there, and we will work to address those here live on the call. I joked about this on Wednesday. We are not gluttons for punishment, so we're not going to keep the Zoom window open forever, but we do welcome you to take this time to ask what questions you have. On the screen here, you'll see securityservices@mcnc.org. That is my team's alias to start your questions that you might have that you want to take offline, come one-on-one with us. But then also my email address and Dave's email address for escalation are also there. So please feel free to utilize those. So a couple of questions already in the queue. One first part is for PSUs using Zscaler. What does the interoperability look like between Zscaler and Palo Alto Firewall in terms of application blocking and allowing? Gonz, do you want to take that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, the PA does have the capability of blocking applications and allowing applications. At least my understanding of how we're going to be working this is we're going to be using application or the app ID to identify risky apps and place policies in place to block those. But at any time you could request, a policy be added to say block Facebook or allow Facebook. But at the end of the day, that will be an on-prem block. So if you want to still block that for your remote users, you're still going to have to block it in Zscaler, right? So there will be, definitely some learning curves as we move forward through this project. But we will work with you to make sure that you have the proper configuration to meet your required needs.
I think the other thing to point out on there too is that Zscaler currently is primarily focused on 80 and 443, ports 80 and 443. So we'll have a lot more flexibility on, applications that are using ports other than 80 and 443.
Thanks, guys. So there's a follow-up to that question specific to, does the Palo Alto, the URL license included in this service? So the answer is no, that URL filtering license is not included in the base service that we are providing today. The solution that we have in place is exactly where we were just starting with this question, is Zscaler, right? So if you are interested in that URL filtering, Zscaler, if you're not already utilizing that, is another free service that is available to you, and we can work with you on addressing that. So there is another question. Will local IT have access to traffic log monitoring? I don't know if Dave or Chris or David, either one, and if you guys want to take that question.
Yeah, I can take that. So the short answer is yes. Dave mentioned the Palo Alto Panorama platform. So that is the platform that is utilized to manage and monitor all the firewall devices. So every PSU will have access to Panorama to be able to view your firewall's configuration and your firewall's log information. Panorama is a web-based application. So as part of the deployment and setup of your environment, you will be given information on here's how you access Panorama, here's how you log in and have access to that information.
Thanks, Chris. So there's a couple questions about the VPN capability. Dave, do you want to talk about the VPN capability that's included in the service?
Sure, you're asking me to talk about it because you told me 4 times to make sure I included it in my comments in the webinar, and I completely forgot about it. So
I wasn't going to call you out, but I appreciate that you called me.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
I thought I'd call myself out, save you the save. Yes, so we've been working and testing. I know a lot of folks out there have worked with Diane, certainly, around configuring VPN with MFA. We've tested that out for both Google and Azure, and we're confident in its ability to support both of those platforms, similar to what we're doing currently with the ASA. And we're also, and again, I should have mentioned this as part of the configuration migrating, site-to-site VPN capabilities, things like SAS tunnels for, the old AS400 stuff. Those are the types of things that we'll support and work with you on as part of the migration. So.
Thanks, Dave. Yep. So there's one last question about the migration from the ASA to the Palo. I don't know, maybe Gonz, if you want to talk about the way that we're using Expedition to do that transition.
Sure. So I think the question was around vWire. That is not a process we're going to be doing as part of our migration, because in order to do vWire, that extends the length of the engagement, right? As Dave mentioned, it's a pretty aggressive schedule, 40 to 50 firewalls a month. So what we're going to be doing is basically taking your current ASA config, we're going to be running it through Expedition, we're going to be cleaning it up, optimizing the configuration, and then reviewing that configuration with you prior to your deployment, right? For 2 reasons. One, we want to make sure that we didn't add anything to it that wasn't there previously, which, I mean, that's probably not going to happen, but still, once again, it's always good to review your configuration. And the second one is to have that risk assessment conversation, right? These are ports or these are services that you're currently using that open you up to a risk, right? And you need to understand that those risks exist in your firewall. And then if you want us to help you fix them, we will. But at the end of the day, if you choose to move forward, you have to be ready to accept those risks. But once again, we will sit down and help you understand that before we actually deploy the firewall.
Thanks, Gonz. All right, and Chris, I think you're going to get the next one.
Yeah, so there's a question about the specific services being provided by the Palo Alto platform. Most folks are aware that Palo has lots of different licenses, modules, features that you can turn on. So just for clarification, what we are providing as part of this service to PSUs is everything that comes in the base Palo Alto license. So specifically, that's the app ID functionality that Dave and Gonz talked about, the ability to inspect traffic and create policies based on application attributes, not just ports and protocols. That's there. The VPN functionality for both site-to-site VPNs as well as endpoint clients that can create remote connections. And as was discussed, we will have the ability to integrate multi-factor authentication into that deployment to give you secure remote access into your network. So all of that functionality and all the basic rules and traffic monitoring that comes with the base Palo Alto, that's there. In addition to that, we are also providing Palo's advanced threat prevention ATP license, and that's where you get IPS functionality. That's where you get detection of security interesting things through analyzing the traffic that's flowing through the firewall. Our security operations folks will be the ones monitoring that and can respond based on what is detected there. So that's the kind of the advanced security function. So other modules like URL filtering, like DNS filtering, like sandboxing or endpoint protection, those kinds of things, those are not part of the service that MCNC is offering. So one of the questions that we got in the webinar on Wednesday was, well, what if I want to add that on? Can I do that? The answer to that question is not today. We may have an ability to do that in the future, but for the purpose of getting this service out the door and allowing us to complete the migration of all the existing DIT firewalls, that those add-ons will not be part of what is available today. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, Chris. Gonz, I'm going to throw another VPN question over to you. Can you talk about the migration process from the ASA VPN setup to what it will look like for the Palo Alto?
Sure. So currently today, folks that are using Google to authenticate their VPN connections are basically using what they call DAP policies in the ASA. We will be basically creating similar policies in the PA. We cannot migrate these policies over, but that was part of what Dave had mentioned earlier when we were testing MFA with Google. We were also testing the capability of creating group-based policies for VPN access to specific resources. So whatever you currently have configured today as a DAP policy in the ASA, we will create a similar policy in the PA as well. At the end of the day, we still will require you to help us test these policies because we can't test them for you. But we will, we will work with you to make sure that they look exactly the way they were in the previous firewall.
Thanks, Gonz. So there's a question about the Panorama dashboard training, whether it'll be individualized or if we'll be doing that in a future webinar, information on the website. So our plan is to do some training once we start rolling this out, to do some webinars, make those available to you to make sure that you understand what capabilities that you have in that read-only access in Panorama. There's a question, is SSL decryption part of the deployment? I don't know, Dave or Chris, if you guys, either one of you want to answer that question.
I can. Dave, you want to answer?
Sure. So we've done, as you can imagine, an awful lot of testing. We have reconciled our test results with Palo stuff. The bottom line is that SSL inspection will impact throughput by about 60 to 70%. So I guess the short answer is no, not in terms of doing extensive testing. Certainly on not testing, but doing extensive SSL decryption. We also, SSL decryption is available through Zscaler, which is a best practice that we encourage. So there's SSL inspection available through Zscaler, but the impact that it has on the firewall models has not been incorporated into the size of the firewall model that's being offered for the different bandwidth tiers.
And the other thing that I would say in addition to that, we talk about this in the conversations we have within the security team. As Dave mentioned, SSL decryption on anywhere you're doing it is expensive. It's if you're talking about trying to do it on a perimeter device like a firewall, or even doing it in Zscaler, it requires a lot of resources. It taxes the things that have to do it. So a solution like the endpoint protection solution that we offer with CrowdStrike, that is available at no cost, is a way to get that same kind of visibility of traffic without having to incur that expense, because the visibility comes at the endpoint where the traffic either originates or terminates. So that's just a thing to keep in mind, that where the industry is going in general is SSL inspection decryption is really hard to do. So pushing as much of that as you can to an endpoint to get that visibility helps ease the burden of having to do it elsewhere in the network. So that's just a plug for using the endpoint service, because it will give you enhanced protection capability around that as well.
Right. Thanks, Chris. Gonz, throwing another MFA question at you. With Palo Alto, do Microsoft Azure-based MFA?
Yes, the PA does have support for multiple MFA products. Azure is one of them. They pretty much support all of the industry-leading MFA products out there. So at the end of the day, like I said, right out of the gate, we'll definitely be supporting the Google and the Azure, because those are two that we're familiar with. If you're using something else, we will work with you to get that working. That may be a slower process, right? Because it may be something we've never seen before, but we will definitely work with you. And at the end of the day, we also have the ability to open tickets with Palo Alto support to get them to help us with any products that we are unfamiliar with.
Great, thank you, Gonz. There's two quick questions. One, we will be sharing out the link of this recording. We'll post it to the YouTube channel hopefully early next week, and we'll share that out with everyone who registered to attend, and also it'll go along with the statement of works that'll be pushed out early next week. So yes, the recording will be available. If you don't, for whatever reason, you're not someone that receives that link from me, then you have my contact information. Please feel free to reach out, and I can make sure to send that on over to you. There's another question. If you are one of the PSUs that is not currently utilizing DIT's service, but you do know what your deadline is for next year, I would say go ahead and reach out and let's get the statement of work started. And that way, as we are able and the schedule allows, we can get you slotted in. And if we have an extra moment, we'll definitely prioritize you. But if again, knowing that if your internal deadlines are a little bit pushed out, that gives us some flexibility there. So just feel free to email security services, and we'll get you started on that. All right, so that is the end of the questions that we have. Feel free to put that. There it goes. All right. Will user or group-based policy be addressed? And if so, are you looking to connect to internal AD, cloud auth, etc.? Gonz.
So I'm assuming you mean for policies, right? Is that what you're asking for? Beyond the VPN.
Correct.
So that's a good question, and I don't have the answer to that, right? Because that's something that's going to require quite a bit of support, and it's going to be very custom to your deployment. So it's definitely something that we can talk about prior to your during your migration, but it's not something that I can answer today.
Yeah, I would step out on a limb and say, from a service standpoint, that is not something that we have designed, and therefore it is not something that will be available in the service day one. But as Gonz said, and as Dave alluded to earlier, we want this service to deliver what you need from a business standpoint. And so I think it would be the kind of thing that, day one, it would not be there, but we would work over time to be able to add it in to accommodate what you're trying to do as best we can.
Thanks, guys. All right. Any other questions? All right, so I'll start to fill in the silence here. Feel free to post any additional questions that you have in the Q&A. Again, you have our contact information listed on this slide. I'll be sharing out the link to the webinar. Really important to, if you're a DIT customer today, to be looking at, looking for the email that'll be coming from me early next week with the statement of work in it, so that we can move the project along as we discussed earlier. So while we're waiting, right before we close out, Chris, Dave, David, or Gonz, you guys have anything that you would like to share, sort of parting words here? Not all at once.
No, I'm good.
I think I can speak for all of us that we are very excited to get this project started. And just like that, we have one other question. Oh, yeah. So we got your question, and we'll definitely look at the schedule and make sure that and understand where you sit on that. So thanks for that. All right, so feel free to send questions on our way. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great rest of your Friday afternoon. Thanks, everybody.